what you've been seeing this last hour?
Well, Michael, we've been getting the northeast bands of Irma here on the East Coast. So gusts over 100 kilometers per hour, sheets of rain at times, and we've seen on and off tornado warnings in this area, all about 150 kilometers from the center of the storm, just to our west. So that just gives you an idea of the size of Irma, that even on the East Coast with those new westward tracks, we're still seeing the wrath. And storm surge is also a big story just to the south of me. Behind me, I'm on the balcony of our hotel. Trees are coming down. We've got a lot of branches, snapped trees, and this hotel is in lockdown. There's a curfew in this county through to tomorrow morning. And again, we're in that northeast quadrant, as Colette will probably show you, of the storm, which often gets some of the tornadoes and stronger gusts this far away from the center, Michael.
Well, as you were saying that, Johanna, we're showing the track of the storm right now in that satellite shot. Again, the storm is now moving its way along the Gulf Coast rather than the Atlantic coast as originally thought. But this is a huge storm. And with that, I want to bring in you, Colette, because this storm, we have to say, Irma has been described as a historic storm. What makes Irma so historic?
Well, it's historic in many ways. I mean, we've had these things where we've had 2 hurricanes and then 3 hurricanes right at the same time for the Atlantic. Also, as I was mentioning earlier, it's historic in terms of how we've been able to track this. The National Hurricane Center has been very close in terms of those models and using those to track this storm. It stayed within about 100 kilometers over the last several days of what was expected, and that is somewhat unprecedented. So it's good to see that we've got the technology and that our models are getting better and better. Of course, it gives us more lead time to get folks to safety and out of harm's way. Now, if we look at the center of that storm, and of course, Johanna was just talking about this section right here. She's over towards Coral Springs. That's that northeast quadrant where we have the strongest winds in a hurricane. You're always going to see that counterclockwise circulation. This area here where it looks like there's nothing going on, absolutely that's not the case. In fact, as the storm passed across the Keys, that radar and those returns from the radar in the Keys, we lost that communication. So we're just not getting the returns to show the filled-in section to the south side of the storm. So still very, very heavy bands of heavy thunderstorm activity. Some strong bands are pushing up towards Miami right now, headed towards Johanna here in Coral Springs as well over about the next hour. And also the storm surge, because this pull of the winds, Michael, coming in from the ocean towards the East Coast, there are parts of Miami now flooding with over 5 feet of surge that they're seeing there, and there could be sections there that could get up to 6 or 8 feet. And then once the storm continues to push further north, the problem is that some of that water, certainly most of it on the west side, has been receding because those winds are pushing against it. That's all going to push back in as the track takes the storm further to the north. So Category 4 at this point, 215 kilometers an hour. And then it looks like by about 8 p.m., you see it here. Let's take you in for a closer look so you can see exactly in the path. Naples by 8 p.m. up towards, it looks like Fort Myers area, Port Charlotte, and then after that up towards Tampa, and of course, for Jays fans, up towards Dunedin, too. Michael.
Well, we're going to keep tracking it, of course. And, you know, Johanna, I want to bring you back in here because we now have a question from Stephen Dieter. And this is his question to you, Johanna. How much moisture could Irma pick up in the Gulf as it makes its way north towards Tallahassee?
Yeah, good question, because we are tapping into very warm waters around the Florida Keys, and that's why this storm actually re-strengthened after it moved away from Cuba, making landfall probably twice as a Category 4. So a lot of moisture available, and we're going to see this moisture spread out across a big part. I'm actually looking at some pooling of the water behind me in Coral Springs. We're under an aerial flood warning, so we're looking at overland flooding. As Colette mentioned, though, storm surge on the East Coast right now is a big story. Miami seeing about 1 to 2 meters moving in. That's just south of us, and that's before the storm surge switches on the other side. So you've got storm surge, overland flooding, and then intense downpours. These thunderstorm bands that we're getting behind me are bringing some pretty intense rainfall rates. So I think some areas could see upwards of 250 plus millimeters. I know Colette's watching that closely as well. The storm will also speed up, so we're not looking at the kind of rainfall rates we saw with Harvey. This is a very different story and very different storm, where we've got many other factors with just one hurricane, one major hurricane, Michael.
One major hurricane, as you say, but we also know that others are forming. And with that, Colette, I want to bring in a question that Kat Ward is asking. And this is what Kat has to say, Colette. Can Irma fuel other hurricanes that have formed?
Can Irma, just so I want to make sure I understand the question.
Can Irma fuel the other hurricanes that we're watching form right now?
Yeah, no, Irma itself wouldn't be what would fuel other hurricanes to form. Irma instead is fueling other things, like we're talking about, like severe thunderstorms, and we've had tornado watches and tornado warnings. So Irma itself can fuel severe weather. Now, what has been fueling Irma, however, and also prior to that Harvey and certainly Jose, are those very warm waters that we are seeing, and then the disturbances that move off the coast of West Africa and then push towards the Caribbean. So those ingredients are still there, Michael, and we're in the peak of hurricane season right now. So could we see more storms, not because of Irma, but because of all those ingredients that formed Irma?
And I'm going to stay with you here, Colette, because you mentioned the warmer waters. And to be fair, I don't know if you can answer this question, but Jessica Doherty is asking this. How are the hurricanes linked to climate change?
That is the million-dollar question, right? A couple of things that we can say about that, though. We know as a whole that our planet, the temperature is increasing, right? We have records for that, and we can see that we're seeing an increase in the overall temperature, melting our ice caps, melting some of our icebergs, and that's increasing what we're seeing in terms of water levels in our oceans. But also that heating of the planet, we're seeing a heating of the waters, too. The cutoff for hurricane development is generally about 26.5 degrees Celsius for the water temperature. So if we have a planet that's getting warmer, then one of those ingredients that fuel to be forming hurricanes, for hurricanes to form, we're looking at seeing more of that. So if you've got a gas tank that was 3/4 full, now we're talking about a gas tank that's full in terms of some of that ammunition or those ingredients for the formation of these kinds of storms. So in that way, I would say in the big picture is how it would be linked to climate change.
Okay, and I want to bring in this next question to you, Johanna, because in addition to being a meteorologist with us here at CBC, you're also a pilot. And this is a question from Blake Marks. And Blake is asking, if at all, how will Irma and Jose, that is the next hurricane that we're watching for after Irma, how will Irma and Jose affect flights going from southern U.S. to southern Europe and northwestern Africa?
Big impacts, Michael, across much of continental U.S. as far as flights. We flew in on Wednesday into Miami on an empty flight. The flight we were with, though, packing extra seats in the plane so they could take people out before the storm hit. So most of the airports across the southern peninsula closed, likely for the next couple of days. And there will be secondary impacts when it comes to flight delays, having to cancel flights that would have come in and out of Florida. We're also looking at impacts up to Georgia. So I would say check your flights anywhere you're going because of the trickle-down effect over the next couple of days. This is a big storm impacting very populated cities, both sides of the peninsula. These are major hubs. And again, a lot of secondary impacts because of Irma over the next couple of days.
And, you know, Johanna, I'm going to stay with you. And again, I don't know if you can answer this question, but you are on the ground, as we say, at Coral Springs in Florida. And this is a question that we're getting from Margaret Ketchum. And this is, Margaret asked the following question. Are any evacuees left on the highway?
That's a good question, Margaret. There are still people on the roads, very few though. We were out yesterday on the beach, Pompano Beach, just north of Fort Lauderdale. And actually when we came out in the morning, there were several hundred people on the beach watching these incredible waves. The winds had just started to pick up. These were all locals. We're not actually under the evacuation order here in Coral Springs, but we are under a hurricane warning. And as I mentioned, on and off tornado warnings. But after a couple of hours in the morning, police came by, got everyone off the beach. A curfew was put in place. So there is a general curfew across much of the southern peninsula of Florida right now. Everyone in lockdown mode. Sheriffs are going around to make sure the streets are safe. But in areas like Miami and the Southwest getting hit right now, police and officials are sheltering in place too. So while there are some people who stayed behind, many people did get out. In the hotel we're staying at right now, we are staying with many evacuees who moved north from both Miami and the Florida Keys. And there's real concern. I mean, these are places that have seen seen hurricanes before. This is a hurricane alley for many people, but this one is like none other, and people on the ground know that, so they're taking this very seriously.
Okay, well, let's go back to the Weather Center with the next question. And Colette, I know you were showing us the map earlier of the path of Irma itself, and perhaps it's worthwhile to call up that map as I read this question. Sure. This is from Norm Woodside. When does a hurricane turn into a tropical storm, and when is it predicted Irma will become a tropical storm?
So in terms of when it becomes a tropical storm into a hurricane or vice versa, essentially it has to do with the Saffir-Simpson scale that we use in terms of the wind speeds, right? So for it to become from a tropical storm to go up to a hurricane, or that first level of a hurricane, Category 1, that cutoff is at 119 kilometers an hour. So as soon as it gets to that strength, we no longer call that a tropical storm. It still has those tropical properties, but at that wind speed with those winds, we're talking about sustained winds over 119 kilometers, it means it becomes a Category 1 storm. Then as it strengthens, we go along that scale and looking at where it becomes a Category 3, Category 4. Right now we're at a Category 4, which starts once you get over those 210 kilometer an hour winds. I want to show you that track again, because I do want to mention as well, as it begins to interact with the landmass, also, although it will still have fuel from warm waters, the waters will begin to get a little bit cooler as it pushes up here. Plus that interaction as it goes from the Florida-Georgia line, Michael, it means that will begin to weaken it, and that is when it's going to start to drop back down. But not only that, as it loses some of its tropical components, it actually becomes a depression again, but it becomes later extratropical, is what we would call it, because it doesn't have the same sort of core that it had when it formed over the tropics, if that makes sense.
It does, Colette, thank you. And, I'm going to answer a question here because Yusra Kamar is asking, how can we help citizens who are suffering? And what we can tell you, Yusra, is that we did hear from state officials in the last hour. They're advising people to donate to the Red Cross. You can also research by going to the Florida State as well if you are interested in making any type of donation or try to help. And with that, Johanna, I want to bring you back in because we are getting this question from Andrea Murphy. And Andrea is asking this question: which is the most serious concern? Damage from winds, storm surge, or the amount of rainfall?
Yeah, fair question, Andrea. And we are seeing all three impacts, and it's all a matter of timing and location. Certainly, as you may have heard, storm surge is one of the biggest concerns on both coasts. And that's because this is such a powerful storm that as it moves northward, it literally pushes the water forward with it, pushes it ahead. On top of that, you've got the counterclockwise winds gusting at over 250 kilometers per hour. That's adding to the forward motion of the storm. Right now, we're seeing it on the East Coast. So the winds right now where I'm on the East Coast are actually blowing almost directly into me. We're on the sheltered side of the hotel, just to our south, Miami, getting the storm surge right now. And that's where evacuation orders were in place. We are seeing inundation. As that storm tracks north, we're going to see the winds switch here. They'll be coming in from the south as that storm moves north. Then they'll be coming in from the north for the West Coast. And that's where we're looking at the big storm surge on the West Coast from Naples through to Tampa Bay. So storm surge, certainly one of the biggest concerns, because there it's 4 to 5 meters. I know Colette has that zoomed in storm surge map. That's where we are looking at communities being completely inundated. On top of that, damage, flying debris with very dangerous winds and with such a huge wind field. Again, I'm here on the East Coast, 150 kilometers from the center, and we're still getting hurricane force winds. Flooding is also a big concern, inland flooding, and with that storm surge, it ends up locking in the inland flooding and it can't run out. So a lot of different concerns, and I have to add tornadoes on the east side of the storm. We've been under a tornado warning over the past 12 hours on and off. We were at a beach yesterday, at Pompano Beach. Tornado warning issued. We got inside. A couple hours later, we saw footage of a tornado making its way onto the beach. So I'd say all impacts, it depends on the timing and where we are. This is a very dangerous storm.
Absolutely. Colette, I want to bring in you for the next two questions here. I'm going to ask both of them at once because the first one comes to us from Grant Bell. And Grant is asking, how do you map a hurricane's path? So that's the bigger question. How do you map its path? And then a more specific question from Caden Kaneberger, who asks, when will Irma hit Tampa?
Okay, so let me start with that first question then in terms of what we're looking at for mapping it. Now, the tracks that we are using are going to the National Hurricane Center. We're taking those from the National Hurricane Center because they are the experts in this. However, we all as meteorologists, and what they use are our ensemble models. And, you know, they have a lot of confidence in the current track in terms of what they're seeing. And while I'm kind of talking here, I'm going to back this up so we can look at that track again so we can get into that timing. But, for example, we have different models that we use, and the NAM has been, which is one of them, has been way off with this. It was taking Irma way out here towards the east. But the European and the American models, which we use, have been much closer. In fact, the European about the closest as it's followed that track. And so that's why we're kind of focusing on that. And that's what the National Hurricane Center is using. And then we get our data from them in agreement with them in terms of the projection that we're seeing here. So if we're certainly seeing this past Key West, we know that now it's moved past Key West, it's approaching Naples. Sunday at about 8 p.m. is when we see it here between, so this is later today, obviously, Naples and Fort Myers. After that, up towards Tampa between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. So it's going to be passing likely through Tampa. It was Tampa, right, Michael, that
is correct, Tampa.
Yeah, it's through the overnight hours here. And, you know, if I could just give a bit of historical context to this, the worst hurricane in terms of the deadliest that the United States has ever seen, or Canada for that matter, was the Galveston one back in 1900. About 8,000 people died then. It may have been as much as 12. That was also a Category 4 storm. They didn't know that it was coming. Look at the technology that we have now in terms of what we can see and how close we can be, within about 100 kilometers accuracy with the forecast of what we've been seeing here.
Well, it is amazing as to the information we can give people now. But, you know, with that said, Johanna, I do have to ask you, and this is a technical question, so people at home, please bear with us. I know that you're working with limited battery right now. Can you stay with us for a time still?
Yeah, we've had flickering power outages. Our team has come fully prepared, so we're plugged in right now, and we've got emergency power in case things go down, which they might.
Okay.
But thanks for checking.
Okay, well, sounds good. So we're going to stay with you right now because I do want to ask this next question. Sheena Patel is actually watching from Florida. She says, can you explain the difference, and to this I'm asking you, Johanna, can you explain the difference between storm tide and storm surge? Will surge come after the storm?
Yes, so there is a difference between tides and storm surge. Tides are regular occurrences. We see high and low tide based on the moon a couple times a day. I was watching that very closely because if high tide lines up with storm surge, we could talk about doubling the impact of flooding. So the high tide in the southwest happened late last night, just as the storm was moving in, and we're still waiting to get first reports back from some of the places in the Florida Keys that would have seen a bit of a high tide at the same time as that storm surge. So there is definitely a correlation, but storm surge is connected only to storms, and it happens ahead of the storm in most cases. So as that storm is moving forward, that forward motion and the wraparound winds are literally blowing the top of the water towards the coast. It's like a wall of water that moves inland. We not only get that ahead of the storm, but we can get it behind. And you might have seen some pictures or heard of a drawback happening on the west side right now. So people actually looking out on the west side, even though they're getting lashed, and seeing the drawback, something that looks like a tsunami is coming. That's as those winds are pulling away from the coast. As Irma tracks northward, those winds are going to shift. We're going to see the drawback here on the east coast. They're going to get the storm surge. And right now, as that storm moves northward, we're actually getting a southerly flow. I know you can see them on Colette's maps as well. Storm surge could move back into the Keys on the back end of Irma. So it's a very dynamic situation. Even as that eye passes, people not out of the clear.
Okay. This next question I'm going to share with you, Colette, because this is being asked by Jamie Broydell, and I don't know, or Broydell, and I don't know if it's too early to be able to say yes or no, but Jamie is asking, will Irma hit Newfoundland or Canada at all?
You know, that's something I'll be looking at the long-range models. Right now, we're pretty focused on what's happening with our nowcasting and our short-term forecasting with this storm. But it's a great question, and there's a good likelihood of that. What's going to matter are a few things, but one is the jet stream and those upper currents. Is that going to pull in some of the moisture? I think it is quite likely that we will see at least some of that heavier rain towards Atlantic Canada, the remnants of what will be left of Irma, and possibly some of these winds, too. It will depends, if its track takes it back out over the Atlantic as it moves up, or if it stays on land. At the very least, there's a good chance at least the Maritimes will have some heavier rain, but we'll focus on that more too in the coming days.
Okay, and Johanna, this is a good question to ask of you. This is James McDonald, and it's a question that many viewers have of our teams when they go to the ground like you are right now in Florida, because James is asking, what time do reporters leave for safety in this storm? When do you make that decision?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because we've got 3 teams on the ground right now, Tampa, Naples, and here on the East Coast, just north of Fort Lauderdale. Safety is first for us. I've got an amazing team on the ground. Patty behind camera has been through hurricanes before. I've got my producer, Megan, who is making contingency plans for contingency plans and also monitoring the situation behind me right now. Again, we're in a sheltered position. We're following the evacuation orders just like everyone else. When we flew into Miami on Wednesday, we checked into a hotel, unpacked our gear, and then got the evacuation order. So we moved north into a hotel that we didn't feel quite comfortable in as the storm approached. So then we moved inland. So again, we're taking everything very seriously. We do have good backup plans. Safety is first. And it helps that I've got all my weather maps, and I'm in constant contact with my team in the weather center so that I can see what dangerous cells are approaching us as well. But I'm glad you asked. Even though we want to get the story to you, safety is first for all of our teams.
Okay, Johanna. And the last question I'm going to give to you, Colette, because it's a good question. It's a nice wrap-up that we're going to get here from Figaro Miliani. And Figaro is asking, where is Irma right now? And to his question, not only where is Irma right now, but fill us in as to the latest numbers on this hurricane.
Sure, and let me just back things up again, and we'll take you through. These are the watches and warnings associated with Irma. Closer look, there's that eye wall. This is, as we get to that last image, that's the current location. And just to show you exactly where that is, this is the big picture. The wind's 215 kilometers an hour. Its movement to the north at 14 kilometers an hour, a Category 4, and your exact location here as it is now moving there up towards Naples. So we're going to be seeing that push as it's going over that Marco Island area up towards Naples in the next few hours here.
Okay, Colette, thank you for that. That is our Colette Kennedy at the CBC Weather Center. And as you can see on the right of your screen, that is our senior meteorologist, Johanna Wagstaffe, in Coral Springs, Florida. Colette, Johanna, thank you for this. And from our weather center and from Coral Springs, we want to show you now the look at Jacksonville, Florida. Again, this is on the Atlantic side of the state, but already the bands of Hurricane Irma are lashing out. This is not the eye of the storm. These are the outer wind bands.